It's Dave's podcast.
Dave's Podcast, Episode 24. This is a special edition. I have a guest interviewee, my mum. For many years, she has told me stories of her younger life and of being evacuated during World War II. As she approaches her 90th birthday, I thought it was about time I got these recorded, so this is what follows. I apologise for the sound quality, as it was recorded on genuine 1940s recording gear to keep the authenticity. Okay, I'm here with my mum. If you'd like to say who you are.
I'm Margaret Terry. I was born on the 15th of June 1934.
So what's been in your earliest memory?
Well, my earliest memories are when I was about 3. And I remember my father came in with a radio. And we'd never had a radio of our own. And he started playing it, and it was music. And I can remember my mother holding my hands and us dancing round the kitchen. And that's one of the very earliest. And I always look back on that as a very sweet memory.
Oh. So, and when was your sort of first memory with them when the war happened?
Well, that was in 1939 when I was 5 1/4, and I was evacuated. I was the youngest in my school. I can remember it vividly, even although I was only 5, because to start with, I went off as a rehearsal carrying a little suitcase, and they said no, I wasn't to have a suitcase, I was to have something that would fit over my shoulder. And so I remember my father coming back and making one of his scout bags that he had, shortening the handle so that it would fit over me, a 5-year-old, and off I went with one change of clothes, one toy, and I was given a carrier bag that I had to give the person who was going to take me. I remember I had a bar of chocolates and biscuits and a tin of corned beef. I can't remember what else was in it, but I know I had to give it to them. And we all sat on the pavement, and this little girl came along, and I saw her speaking to the lady in charge, and she said, "Margaret Cox," as I was then, "stand up." And I stood up, and she said, "You're to go with this little girl." And we ran down the road, and her mother said, "Oh, this is the one we've got." And that was the start of my evacuation.
Then how long did you stay there?
Not very long, only about probably 2.5 months at the most, because my mother came and saw how unhappy I was. And because we had what they called the phony war, Germany didn't come over and start bombing us, my mother took me home. And it was fine then. We didn't have any problems then until the following summer, when suddenly they started the blitz of the East End. And then it got really bad, night after night in the shelter. And my mother and I then went away down to Suffolk.
So who did you stay in Suffolk?
Well, we stayed with the people who are quite happy to take evacuees. It was a little bit different from the life we were used to in London. But we stayed there just over 6 months, I think. Good. Eventually, my mother became a housekeeper to this lady, an elderly lady on her own. Her relatives, who seemed to be rather rich farmers, paid for my mother to stay and me to stay in the house and look after this elderly lady. She was very nice. She always used to say grace before every meal, And if I had one of my friends come for tea or something, they used to think it was rather funny. But because I'd got used to it and was quite happy to do it. And that was the second time I was evacuated. Then when we came home, we had a large spell in the middle when not a lot went on because Germany invaded Russia. So they were tied up somewhere else. And then, of course, after 1944, when we invaded France, they suddenly unleashed the flying bombs. And then it became very hairy in London. And then my mother and I, and by then, a baby sister who'd been born in the April, the three of us all went off down to stay at Weymouth. A bit disconcerting, the first place we stayed at, because it was a lot of ladies lived in this very big house, so we just had one room, and they seemed to have a lot of callers. A lot of American soldiers were always coming in and out the house. And I mean, as a child of nearly 10, I'd have been 10 then, I didn't think about it at all. And my mother obviously never said anything to me. But we happened to be in the local park one day, and my mother said where we were living, and the lady she was talking to was absolutely flabbergasted. She said, "You can't stay in that house." She said, "Not with all those soldiers coming and going. Do you know what sort of house it is?" Well, I didn't know what she was talking about, obviously, but my mother did, and I suppose nodded her head. So the woman said, "Look, I've got a room in my house. You leave that house and come and stay with me. I'm sure you'll be much more comfortable." And we did, and it was lovely. And we stayed there for a couple of months. And then, of course, gradually the war was coming to an end and we came home.
So what was life like in the war with rationing and things?
Well, rationing, well, the trouble is when you start something quite young at 5 and you're rationed, you don't necessarily realise quite how bad it is. And looking back, when I had a growing family of my own, I realised how difficult it must have been for mothers trying to provide for their family during the war. We got used to not having sweets because they were rationed. You had very few sweets, biscuits and all sorts of things. And because we didn't have oranges, bananas, or peanuts or anything that we had later on in life. So we did miss quite a lot. But of course you gradually get used to it and that becomes a way of life. And because I was 5 when the war started and 11 when it finished, so it was quite a big part of my childhood.
So what's the story of your rabbit that you've told us?
Oh yes, we had a couple of rabbits that in a hutch, and I loved these rabbits. I looked after them and talked to them and everything. And one particular day I came in and I said, "What's for dinner?" And my mother said, "Rabbit." And I looked at her, looked out in the garden, and I just stood at the door of the kitchen and said, "You murderers, you've killed my rabbit." Ran away, wouldn't eat rabbit, and I've never eaten, well, knowingly, I've never eaten rabbit to this day. And certainly after not reading the book that came out that made rabbits more endearing.
The Watership Down.
Watership Down, yeah.
So, and your dad, through the Second World War, he did various jobs? Or
Well, he didn't do various jobs. To start with, before he was called, he wasn't called up to go in the army because he always had a very bad leg and his eyesight wasn't perfect. So to start with, he used to have to be a warden at work, and he used to have to go up onto the roof of the big building where he worked and just warn anyone if he saw any enemy planes coming over. And he used to have to spend sort of hours there. Well, then gradually he did get called up, not to go and fight, but to be sent away out of London to work in a factory. And he had a few weeks training because he'd never done that sort of work before. And he had some training, and then off he went. and we only saw him at weekends. He would come back to London at weekends, and he was mending Spitfires. But because at the time they wanted all the Spitfires back in the air within hours, he was working quite hard and was on his feet for long hours at a time, working on these Spitfires. But he was there for about 5 or 6 years working in the factory. So we got used to him not sort of being around. So although we did see him weekends, it wasn't quite as bad as a father who'd gone away to fight in the war as a soldier.
So do you remember VE Day and celebrate?
Very, very well, because we knew it was coming, and so we dyed a sheet red and we dyed another sheet blue, and we cut them all into little pennants. And I can remember, because I was 11 years old then, with my mother, we carefully pinned or sewed onto rope all these pennants, and we had them going from our front railings right up to the top bedroom. So it made a very a good show, and every house in our road had their pennants out. And somebody dragged out a piano, and we lit a huge bonfire, because right down at the bottom of our road there was a little shop, and it had been bombed. And I know they went in and more or less pulled it to pieces with every bit of wood they could find it, and light this bonfire, because it's the first time we could show a light or have something like a bonfire in 6 years. And I remember everybody went out and they were buying beer and drinking and playing on the piano and singing and dancing, because everybody, thought it was the end of, it was the end of hostilities, but of course it wasn't the end as the war, really, because we were on ration until 1953. I still have my ration book, and I can tell a little story. Just after the war in the grammar school, they tried to get us friendly. We had to be friendly with Germany again, because they didn't want to cause problems like they had at the end of the First World War. And so we were invited to become pen pals with German children. So I put my hand up and said, yes, I'll be a pen pal. So anyway, I don't know, a week or two later, the teacher said, right, I've got some names now. And she listed the names of us girls, we're all girls at the end of this class, and who we were going to write to. And she came to me, as I said, Margaret Cox. Margaret Cox, she said, Adolf Hans. So trust me to get somebody whose name was Adolf, and because I got teased unmercifully about that. So I wrote to this chap until, I left school, and wrote to him until I was about 19. But I always remember writing to him in 1954 saying how pleased I was that we had didn't have any more rationing. And he wrote back, and he used to write sort of not quite right English, so I'll try and say how I think he might have said it. I am so surprised that you have still had rationing. We have not had rationing for years. When my father read this letter, he said, excuse the French, who won the bloody war?
So what happened? So after rationing and things, then...
Well, by then, obviously, I was quite grown up. But I tell you, they brought sweets off of rationing, and everybody went absolutely berserk and brought so many sweets. Within weeks, they went back on rationing again for another few months, because everybody had gone silly buying sweets, because we hadn't had them for so many years. But I remember I was 19, and that was the first time I had been able to buy my mother a box of chocolates, because I could go and buy them without rationing. And it was quite exciting to do that.
And what was your biggest memory after that then? Once you left school, you were...
Well, I left school at 15, which now is quite young because most people are at school now till they're 18. And I went to work in what was the precursor of computers, because I was punching holes in cards, which were then fed into machines, and they would work the accounting machines. And so I had to learn to punch these holes. It was quite complicated to start with, but I became quite good at it actually, because they didn't want you to make mistakes, because obviously you'd upset people's accounts. So that's what I did. I punched cards, and then after 3 years, I started working on the accounting machines, and which you fed your cards in, and they would print people's accounts. And then I went away on courses down to a village I'd never heard of before called Cookham, and to a hall there called Moor Hall. And I went on a course, 2 or 3 courses. And when I went on a course when I was just 21, I went on a course. And that's when I met the man who eventually became my husband.
My dad.
Yes, your dad.
So when you remember taking my dad to meet your mum and dad?
Yes, on this, we'd been going out a week down here, and we decided to meet in London on a Saturday afternoon. So we met up in London, and at Trafalgar Square, and the nearest theatre that I can't remember the name of the theatre, but I remember the name of the play. We went to see a play called Spider's Web. And when we came out, we had to get on a bus home to my house. And we got into my house, and absolute chaos, because we had a cat and a dog. Now, they say cats fighting like a cat and a dog. Our cat and dog fought. And the first memory I have of my husband in my house was him under our gas stove, which in those days had legs, so there was space underneath, trying to retrieve the cat after the dog was attacking it underneath the gas stove. And that's the first memory I have of my husband in our house in London.
So they although they lived in the same house, they just didn't get on.
No, they didn't tear pieces out of one another, because the cat usually, he'd go and hide somewhere, because cats are very clever at doing that. So
this when you had the tall house that
yes,
went down
from the
store.
Pavement. Yeah, we had a basement, and then 2 floors above.
And then eventually you had Auntie Jenny and David and Roger and Marion all living in the same house at one time. So.
Well, Marion and Roger lived upstairs, yes. My sister and her husband for a while. And then they eventually found their own house. And, that was... I'd got married by then, obviously, and left, because in 1957 I got married, and I left London and went to live in Maidenhead, the little town just outside Cookham.
But they must have been there for what? Because I remember going back there to this house, and they must have been living there. So I would be only 5 or 6. So.
Well, eventually the house where my mother and father lived was bought by the council, and my mother and father had to move out because they decided to pull all these old houses down. Although they were very strongly built, very nice houses, they decided to pull them all down and build blocks of flats, because at that time there were still lots of people and soldiers had come back from the war and didn't have accommodation, so they decided to purchase them. And my mother and father got money, and they were able to buy a house a little bit further out of London, where they lived for a few years, Rains Park.
So didn't they? But they did split up all the money, because then Roger and Marion lived opposite there. Yeah,
my sister... Well, she'd moved there. My sister and her husband had moved there first. And when my mother and father went to visit them, they quite liked the place. So that's why they decided to go and live there. And subsequently, when my sister Jennifer, youngest sister, got married, she went and lived in the next road. So the three of them all lived very close together.
I always assumed they all lived there in London, and when the house was purchased, they all split the money up and all bought houses together.
No.
They all together. No, because my earliest memory is of a big party up the top of the house.
That would have been when my sister was 21. When my sister was 21, it was 1964, and there was a famous group then who were very popular. I'm sure everybody knows the Beatles. And these young people of 21, we played non-stop Beatle music the whole evening. And I had come with my husband and three young children, because still my daughter wasn't born then. And they were all, the three boys were asleep in the room. Well, I put them to bed in the room underneath, and there was so much noise going on. Obviously, the two older ones were upstairs. They'd come upstairs, and eventually my youngest son, Robert, who was only crawling about in his little pyjamas, came up and joined, and he was in the middle of everybody else while they were all dancing up and down.
But I remember the floor was like bouncing.
Well, the floor was bouncing, and when we did eventually go downstairs, because the paint had come off the ceiling and all our bed downstairs was all splattered with white dust from the ceiling.
The whole ceiling could have come in.
Yeah.
Because I remember Marion once, she used to have all the Beatles records, Revolver and Meet the Beatles.
Oh, she had all that.
vinyl.
Oh, yes, she would have done, because she was that sort of that age group. Yeah.
Still got them.
But mind you, it was very funny because I got caught out then, because when my son John, who at that time would have been about 5 or 6, he always used to say, "How old are you, Mummy?" I always said, "I'm 21." I always said I was 21. And then when my sister, who's 10 years younger than me, was 21, I remember my son saying to me, "Oh, that's nice, Mummy. Now you're the same age as Auntie Marion."
So then you were living in Maidenhead.
Yes, when we first got married, we lived in a furnished flat in Maidenhead. And then I was expecting John, and John was born, and we decided then we had to move out. So we were very lucky to find this house on a lovely green in Cookham, Westwood Green, and we moved there when John was 9 months old. And by then I was expecting my second baby, David.
Your favourite son.
I don't have favourites.
And that was 61 Westwood Green.
That's right, 61 Westwood Green. And we went on to have another son, Robert, and a daughter, Libby.
So John was born in hospital.
Yes, he was born in Clifton Hospital. It's been pulled down now, not there anymore.
So but Ian and Robert were born...
And Libby, all born at number 61,
61,
Westwood Green. Yeah.
Oh, wow. Because I remember Robert being at Easter, and you said you've got a little present.
That's right. But Robert, the third boy, was born at Easter. David was only 3 and a bit. He'd been 3 and a quarter. And I remember I'd got some eggs, and I tucked them in the little cot that Robert was lying in. David came in, and I said to him, "Oh, this is your new little brother." I said, "Oh, and he's got you a present." And I sort of lifted up the blanket and got out this egg and gave David. And he looked at me and said, Oh, isn't that kind of him?" And I thought that was so lovely. I always remember that. Yeah.
So, I mean, you've had people that you met on the green, Betty and
well, yes,
which you're still friends with.
Yes, I did. A friend of mine, Betty, when David was born in January, and in the following July, when he'd have been 7 months, we met this lady and her 2 children, who had just moved into this house on the green, and that she had a little boy, Andrew. he was about 6 weeks old, lying in the pram, crying a lot, and then she'd got a little girl of 2 and a bit holding on. And I said to her, "Oh, you've moved into number 66. I used to have a friend live there." And we started chatting. That would have been in the summer of 61. And we haven't stopped chatting because we're still friends.
And then you had Uncle Bert. That's where I lived. Did he live on the Green?
Well, yes, we lived next door.
No.
We lived next door to these people who we became extremely friendly with, and we called Bert and Elsie, and the children called them Uncle Bert and Auntie Elsie. And we had great times with them. We had holidays and all sorts with them, and they were very, very friendly. But sadly, Elsie died when she was only 50, so we lost her quite early. But we used to take Bert on holiday with us, and he absolutely loved coming away with us and the boys, and they loved him because he was into nature. And if you were on the beach, he'd say, "Oh, look at this! Oh, this is..." And the boys got all enthusiastic watching him sort out things in a rock pool or on the beach.
And eating live mussels.
And he loved mussels, so we used to have to all collect mussels at low tide, and then he'd take them home to the holiday let to boil them. And I used to say to him, "Okay, you go off in your car, go home, boil them up, open all the windows, and I'll come home later," which he did. Because they used to... It was quite a smelly business, boiling up mussels.
So then you moved from here. So after...
Well, when Libby was born in October 66, and in the January of 67, we moved from Westwood Green to Sutton Close, which was a detached house, a bigger house for bringing up a family. And that's where the family, all of them grew up really and left to get married and things like that. But we lived there for 32 years and really enjoyed it. It had a lovely garden. But the nicest thing about it was the garden at the end was joined on to the allotments. And for many, many years, we had an allotment that butted onto our garden, and we just had a garden gate going out onto the allotment. And we used to grow so much stuff that we were pretty self-sufficient in vegetables for large parts of the year.
So you were like Felicity Kendall, really?
Yeah, it was a bit like The Good Life. But the children always liked it, because usually on a Sunday evening my husband would have a fire, and he used to be able to light this right at the other end of the allotment, so it didn't sort of blow into the house or anything.
Well, talking of fires, because the major event of the year, I mean, me and Rob were talking about this yesterday, that would be bonfire night.
Oh, bonfire night! We always had a wonderful evening on bonfire night. We used to have all the children in the close where we lived. Family used to come, relations. It was a really big party, and we used to have soup and baked potatoes in their jackets and make a big thing of it. And Rick would light this big fire, and everybody brought fireworks. And then, of course, all the adults used to go inside and have a drink and their supper. And then the children loved it, because there they were all unattended, out in the garden, throwing more wood on the fire, coming in and purloining my potatoes and trying to throw potatoes into the fire to make more potatoes, which was really, I suppose, quite negligent on our part. But we were so busy inside chatting and drinking that they just got on with it. But fortunately, nobody ever burnt themselves or came to any harm.
I think John got hit with a rocket at one time.
Well, we were there when he did that. And he had... One son had a firework land on him, and unfortunately he had a plastic top on, and it melted and burnt him. There's just a little red mark on his... But it wasn't you know,
'Cause
that was the
it used to
only.
be like 50 or 60 people there, wasn't there?
Oh, it was a
major
big do, yes.
event. And then Uncle Roger and that, they would come down from London, and then we used to go fishing on the Sunday.
On the Sunday, yes, you could go fishing in the.
But I mean, we would look forward to that as much as.
Yeah. Well, they
Christmas,
used to
right?
bring these scarecrow. They always made a scarecrow. And we used to
Or
put
a guy like.
a guy,
Okay, yeah.
and to put on the on the bonfire.
Yeah.
And of course, and the family used to try and outdo one another with tricks. And Roger bought a mustard we put on the table, and because when you open that, this great big snake came out, and we had fried eggs we bought that it looked like looked very lifelike, and big blue bottle that you slipped in somebody's tea. Which when I first had it in my tea was very upsetting. So it was a great weekend, that one.
Yeah, no, we used to look. So then, so eventually, then you moved back from Sutton Close, and you moved back to the Green.
Well, yes, because gradually over the years, obviously all our family grew up and all left home, and we were on our own. And there was quite a big garden. There was a big front garden and back garden. And we no longer needed lots and lots of vegetables, so we gave up the allotment and just grew things at the end of the garden. And we decided that perhaps, as we were getting older then, we ought perhaps to think of moving. And I said to my husband, if we do, I want to move back onto Westwood Green where we started, because we're near the shops and my friend lives there. And it so happened that somebody who we knew very closely at the church was moving, and we got to hear of this, and I actually was able to buy the house without any need of an estate agent, and because we knew them, he would let us come in and do alterations and decorating and everything before we moved in, which was very good. And so we came back here, and we've been very.
So what year was that
when we came back here was 1998. So we've been back in this house 25 years now.
So that's 54. So it's just down from where we were. 61.
Yes, and number 54 as opposed to 61. Not many people left on the Green that I knew. That a lot of them moved on. A lot of them sadly have passed away.
But I mean, it used to always be very sought after. I mean, it used to be millionaires and that actually live.
It's all people love to live here, and we still get letters from estate agents saying, if you're thinking of selling your house, we have a list of people waiting to live on the Green. Unfortunately, over the last year or so, a few young families, or quite young families, have moved in or with babies, which is lovely, because that means they'll, as us older ones leave, there's younger ones taking over, which is lovely.
But it's changed quite a lot from when we were first here then. I mean, we never had the cars on. Well,
no, because I mean, when we were first here, you'd have one plus one car each family, and because the husbands always went off to work on the train, because this was a popular commuter place to live. So most of the husbands all went off and caught the train in the morning. But now, of course, the wife has a car, the husband has a car, and if they get teenage children, as soon as they get to 17, they have a car. So the parking on the Green is a lot different from how it was when you were growing up.
Well, we used to have no car. You could race around like.
Because you used to be able to play in the road, but now you've got to be very careful of young children, or young children coming out between cars. You have to. But we do have a 20-mile speed limit.
Yeah.
It sounds very much like home for you, 20 miles.
Well, yes, and that's it. You wouldn't be hard pushed to go racing around there.
Yeah.
But I mean, we used to race around probably over 20 mile an hour on our bikes, like 5 or 6 abreast.
Oh, yeah, you couldn't do that now because of all the cars parked.
Well, thank you for sharing those stories, Mum.
Oh, that's all right, my love.
It's lovely.
You're very welcome.
Well, if you like it, you can share.